She called me a disgrace. 10 minutes later, the hospital called me their founder. And for most of my life, according to her, I was living in a world of absolute silence. She looked at my scuffed boots, my 10-year-old sedan, and my modest apartment in the rainy outskirts of Seattle, and she saw a failure. She saw a daughter who had missed the memo on how to be a Vance. But she didn't realize that sometimes, the most powerful people in the room are the ones who don't feel the need to make a sound. She thought I was broke, destitute, even until the afternoon we walked through the sliding glass doors of the Northwest Tier Medical Center. That was the day the screaming finally stopped and the truth began to unfold. Growing up in the shadow of my mother's expectations was like trying to breathe in a room with no oxygen. My name is Olivia. To my mother, Eleanor, I was the disappointing middle child. My brother, Marcus, was a corporate lawyer in Manhattan. My sister, Cassidy, married into a real estate dynasty in Chicago. They were the trophies on Eleanor's mantle. I was the cautionary tale. The tension reached a boiling point during the Vance family's annual summer gala, which is really just a fancy way for my mother to brag about her children's bank accounts while sipping expensive Chardonnay. I showed up in a dress I'd bought on sale at a local boutique. It was elegant, but to Eleanor, if it didn't have a 4-figure price tag visible from space, it was rags. "Olivia, darling," she whispered, her voice sharp enough to cut glass as she pulled me into the kitchen away from the guests. "I told you to dress appropriately. People are asking questions. It's embarrassing to have you standing next to your brother looking like you're struggling to pay your heating bill." I took a slow sip of my water watching her. "I'm comfortable, Mom, and I'm doing fine. You don't need to worry about my bills." She let out a short, mocking laugh, the kind that makes your skin crawl. "Fine, you're 32 and you drive a car that sounds like a lawnmower. You live in a zip code people avoid after dark. If you need a loan, just ask. I'd rather give you a handout than have you humiliate this family by appearing poor." That's the thing about people like Eleanor. They equate net worth with self-worth. She didn't know about the investments. She didn't know about the tech patents I'd quietly acquired over a decade of working 18-hour days in a field she couldn't even pronounce. She didn't know that while Marcus was billing hours to buy a Ferrari, I was diversifying a portfolio that could buy the entire street we were standing on. I stayed quiet because I knew the anatomy of a grudge. If I told her the truth then, it would just be another argument. I wanted her to see it. I wanted the reality of her judgment to hit a wall so hard it couldn't be repaired. The gala continued, a blur of forced smiles and condescending remarks. Marcus spent 20 minutes talking about his new summer home in the Hamptons. My mother beamed, practically glowing with pride. When someone asked what I was doing, she quickly interjected, "Oh, Olivia is finding herself. She's very into minimalism right now." Minimalism. That was her code word for "my daughter is a loser." The atmosphere shifted about 3 hours into the party. My grandfather, Arthur, the only person in this family who actually liked me for who I was, collapsed. It wasn't a dramatic fall, just a sudden, terrifying loss of color in his face as he slumped into a chair. In an instant, the veneer of the wealthy Vance family shattered. Panic is a great equalizer. It doesn't care how much you have in your 401,000. Eleanor was hysterical. Marcus was on his phone, not calling 911, but calling his private doctor who didn't even live in the state. "We need the best," Eleanor screamed, clutching her pearls literally. "He needs the Tier 1 facility. But we can't get in there. The waiting list for private care is months long. Only the board members and donors get priority." She looked at me then, her eyes red and frantic. "And look at you, you're just standing there. You can't contribute a dime to his care, can you? You're useless in a crisis, Olivia. While we're trying to figure out how to pay for the best specialists, you're probably wondering if his insurance covers the ward." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself, I just grabbed my keys. "Get in the car, Mom," I said, my voice flat and steady. "I'm taking him to Northwest Tier now. We can't just walk in there," she wailed, even as Marcus helped grandfather into the back of my lawnmower car. "It's a private hospital, Olivia. They'll turn us away at the door once they see you." I ignored her, shifted the car into gear, and drove. I watched her in the rearview mirror, checking her makeup even in the middle of a medical emergency, worried about how she'd look if she met someone influential at the hospital. She spent the entire 20-minute drive berating me. She told me I was delusional for thinking we could get Arthur seen by the chief of staff. She told me that my cheap lifestyle had made me lose touch with how the real world works, the world of power and influence. "You're going to get us laughed out of the lobby," she hissed as we pulled into the pristine, glass-fronted driveway of the hospital. "Just stay behind me and let Marcus do the talking. Maybe they'll think you're the maid." I parked the car right in the reserved circle, not the visitor lot, not the valet. "Olivia, you can't park here," Eleanor gasped. "You'll get towed. This is for the board of directors." I didn't answer. I just opened the door and walked toward the entrance. I could feel the weight of her judgment behind me, the heavy, suffocating expectation that I was about to fail her one last time. But as the automatic doors slid open, the air changed. The sterile, expensive scent of high-end medicine filled the room. The receptionist looked up, her bored expression instantly sharpening into something resembling terror or perhaps deep respect. Eleanor stepped forward, smoothing her dress, ready to beg or bribe her way in. She didn't realize that the stage was already set. She didn't realize that the broke daughter she spent years mocking was the only reason she was even allowed to step foot on this floor. The lobby of Northwest Tier Medical Center was a temple of modern medicine, all white marble, soft lighting, and an eerie silence that only extreme wealth can buy. My mother, Eleanor, was already adjusting her scarf, her eyes darting around the room to see if any of her socialite friends were present to witness our shameful arrival in my old car. She was rehearsing her distressed but dignified face, the one she used when she wanted to manipulate people into giving her what she wanted. "Marcus, you speak," she commanded, ignoring me entirely as we approached the heavy mahogany reception desk. "Tell them who we are. Tell them Arthur Vance needs the VIP suite immediately. Don't let them look at Olivia's shoes, just keep them focused on the name." Marcus stepped forward, straightening his designer tie. He had that smug, Ivy League law school smirk that usually worked in Manhattan boardrooms. "Good afternoon. We have an emergency. My grandfather, Arthur Vance, needs to be admitted. I'll need to speak with the Chief of Staff's office regarding a private room." The receptionist, a woman named Sarah whose name tag I recognized, didn't even look at Marcus's outstretched business card. Her eyes were locked on me. Her hands, which had been resting calmly on the desk, suddenly gripped the edge of the counter. "Just a moment, sir," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly, but she wasn't looking at Marcus. She was looking past him, straight into my eyes. "Sarah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Code Blue protocols for room 402, now, and page Dr. Eris. Tell him the situation is personal." Eleanor let out a sharp, horrified gasp. She grabbed my arm and yanked me back so hard my shoulder clicked. "Olivia, have you lost your mind? You don't bark orders at people in a place like this. You're going to get us kicked out before we even get him a bed." She turned back to the receptionist, her face flushed with a mixture of rage and fake apology. "I am so sorry, miss. My daughter is. She's a bit overwhelmed. She doesn't understand how things work here. Please ignore her. We are prepared to pay whatever deposit is required." I watched Sarah's face. She looked like she wanted to crawl under the desk. She knew exactly who I was, but she also saw the way my mother was treating me. In the anatomy of power, silence is a weapon, and I was using it with surgical precision. "Mom," I said, pulling my arm away. "Be quiet, you're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" Eleanor hissed, her voice a low, dangerous vibrate. "You are standing here dressed like a barista, ordering around the staff of the most prestigious hospital in the Pacific Northwest. Marcus, do something, she's humiliating us." Marcus looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Liv, seriously, just go sit in the waiting area. I've got this. Money talks here, and you don't have the vocabulary for this conversation." At that moment, the double doors behind the desk swung open. Dr. Eris, the chief of surgery and one of the most respected cardiovascular surgeons in the country, came sprinting out. He wasn't walking, he was moving with a sense of urgency that made everyone in the lobby stop and stare. Eleanor's face lit up. She recognized him from the local news. She stepped forward, her hand already extended. Dr. Aris. Thank goodness, I am Eleanor Vance and my father. Dr. Aris didn't even see her. He brushed past her so quickly that the wind from his lab coat ruffled her hair. He stopped exactly 6 inches in front of me. Olivia, he panted, ignoring the stunned silence of my family. I got the page. We're already prepping the surgical suite. The nurses are moving him now. Why didn't you call my private line on the way? I tilted my head slightly, catching my mother's reflection in the glass partition. Her jaw had dropped so low it looked painful. Marcus looked like he'd been hit by a freight train. I was busy driving Ben, I said calmly. How's his vitals? Stable for now, but we need to move fast, Aris replied, already gesturing for the orderlies to take the gurney. He turned to the staff. Clear the hallway, priority alpha. If anyone asks, this is on the Founders protocol. Founders, the word hung in the air like a heavy fog. Eleanor finally found her voice, though it sounded thin and cracked. Doctor, I think there's been a mistake. You're talking to my daughter, Olivia. She doesn't work here. She's nobody. Dr. Aris paused, finally looking at my mother. He looked at her designer handbag, her expensive jewelry, and then at the way she was looking at me with such blatant condescension. A slow, knowing smile spread across his face, the kind of smile a hunter gives a trapped animal. Nobody, Aris repeated, his voice dripping with an irony that Eleanor was too blinded by her own ego to understand. Mrs. Vance, if it weren't for your daughter, this building wouldn't be standing. The Thorne Vance cardiovascular wing was funded entirely by her private endowment 5 years ago. She doesn't work here because she effectively owns the board that hired me. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I could hear Marcus's heavy, uneven breathing. But mostly I could hear the sound of my mother's world collapsing. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in a decade. She looked at my cheap boots and saw the quiet confidence I'd always carried. She looked at my lawnmower car through the window and realized it was a choice, not a necessity. Olivia, she whispered, the arrogance completely gone, replaced by a terrifying realization. You have that kind of money? I didn't smile, I didn't gloat. I just looked at her with the same cold, investigative gaze I used for my business rivals. I told you, Mom, I'm doing fine. You were just too busy looking at the labels on my clothes to notice the empire I was building under your nose. I turned to Dr. Aris. Take care of Arthur. He's the only one in this family who deserves the best. As I walked toward the elevators with the doctor, I didn't look back. I knew Eleanor and Marcus were standing there, frozen in the middle of the lobby, suddenly realizing that the poor daughter they had spent years mocking was the only person standing between them and a massive medical bill they couldn't actually afford. The anatomy of revenge isn't always about a loud explosion. Sometimes it's just the quiet click of a door closing on someone who never deserved to be in the room in the first place. The elevator doors closed, cutting off the sight of my mother's pale, frozen face. As Dr. Aris and I ascended to the private surgical floor, the silence between us wasn't awkward, it was professional. Ben knew me. He knew I didn't care for the theatrics of wealth, I cared for results. But as I watched the floor numbers climb, my mind drifted back to the lobby. I knew Eleanor, she wasn't just shocked, she was calculating. Her brain was a machine designed to process social currency, and she had just realized I was the wealthiest person she knew. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in the Founders Lounge, a room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Puget Sound. I had a tablet in my hand, reviewing the real-time vitals of my grandfather. He was in surgery now. The best team in the country was working on him, and they were doing it because my signature was at the bottom of their paychecks. The door to the lounge burst open. It wasn't a knock, it was an intrusion. Eleanor and Marcus marched in, their footsteps echoing off the hardwood floors. Marcus had lost his smugness, replaced by a frantic, sweating desperation. Eleanor, however, had managed to patch her mask back together. She looked like a woman who had just found a winning lottery ticket and was trying to pretend she'd always had it. Olivia, she cried out, her voice echoing with a fake, high-pitched warmth that made my stomach churn. Darling, why didn't you tell us? All this time we thought you were struggling, and here you are, a philanthropist, a titan of industry. My own daughter, I didn't look up from the tablet. I told you I was fine, Mom, multiple times. You chose to hear broke because it made you feel superior. Marcus stepped forward, loosening his tie. Liv, look, I'm sorry about what I said downstairs. I didn't know, but we need to talk about the family business. If you have this kind of capital, why are you letting the Vance Estates legal firm struggle with those audits? We could have used your expertise. You mean my money, Marcus? I said, finally setting the tablet down. I looked him dead in the eye. And the answer is simple. You never asked, you only ever lectured. You spent 5 years telling me I should go back to school to be more like you. Why would I invest in someone who considers me a failure? Eleanor sat down next to me, attempting to put a hand on my knee. I moved my leg away. She didn't flinch, she just kept smiling, that brittle, terrifying smile. Let's put the past behind us, Olivia. Family is family. Right now, Arthur is in surgery and we need to stick together. But while we're waiting, the hospital billing office sent a digital notification to Marcus. Since you're, well, the owner, I assume you've taken care of the administrative side of things. There it was, the anatomy of the parasite. They didn't want to apologize for the years of emotional abuse. They wanted to make sure the bill was paid. Arthur's care is fully covered, I said. He's on my private plan. He will receive every treatment, every therapy, and every comfort available. He is the only Vance who ever treated me like a human being when I had nothing, so he gets everything I have now. Eleanor sighed with relief, her shoulders dropping. Thank God, I was worried about the insurance premiums. Marcus said this wing charges $50,000 a day just for the suite. I said Arthur's care is covered, I repeated, my voice turning cold like a winter morning in the Cascades. I didn't say anything about yours. Eleanor's smile faltered. What do you mean? The two of you are currently staying in the VIP waiting suite, I explained, gesturing to the luxurious surroundings. You've already ordered catering from the hospital's 5-star kitchen. You've used the private concierge to have your dry cleaning picked up from the gala. All of that is billed separately. And since neither of you are on the founders list and you're not the patients, you'll be receiving the invoice at the end of the week. Marcus's face turned a dusty shade of gray. Liv, you're joking. This is our grandfather's emergency? His medical bills are my gift to him, I said. Your lifestyle while you wait for him is your responsibility. Unless, of course, you'd like to move to the public waiting room on the first floor. I hear the coffee there is almost as bitter as your insults. The outrage on Eleanor's face was a masterpiece. She had spent decades using her wealth as a whip to keep me in line, and now that the whip was in my hand, she couldn't handle the sting. How dare you, she hissed, the fake warmth evaporating. I am your mother, I raised you, I gave you the foundation that allowed you to become whatever it is you've become. No, I corrected her. You gave me the motivation to get as far away from you as possible. You taught me that the only way to be safe in this family was to be untouchable. So I became untouchable. I stood up, picking up my tablet. The surgery will be another 3 hours. You can stay here and pay the daily rate, or you can go home, but don't you dare mention family to me again. You didn't want a daughter, you wanted a trophy. And since I didn't glitter enough for your mantle, you threw me in the trash. You don't get to dig me out now just because you found out I'm made of gold. I walked toward the door, but before I left, I paused. Oh, and Marcus. I checked the logs. You tried to use my name to get a discount at the hospital pharmacy 5 minutes ago. The system flagged it as unauthorized access. If you try it again, security will escort you out of the building. Permanently? I walked out, leaving them in the silence of the room they couldn't afford. I could hear Eleanor starting to scream at Marcus, blaming him for not knowing about my finances. It was a beautiful sound, the sound of accountability finally catching up with the people who thought they were above it. But as I headed toward the intensive care unit, I knew this wasn't over. Eleanor Vance didn't go down without a fight, and I was prepared to show her that my anatomy was built for a much longer war than she ever imagined. 2 hours into my grandfather's recovery, I was sitting by his bedside in the ICU. The machines hummed a steady, rhythmic song, the sound of life being held together by precision and care. Arthur looked frail, but the color was returning to his cheeks. I held his hand, thinking about the only man who had ever told me that my worth wasn't tied to a bank balance, ironically while I used that very balance to keep him breathing. The quiet was shattered by the sound of heels clicking rapidly against the sterile floor outside. I didn't even have to look up to know it was Olivia. She didn't enter a room, she invaded it. "Olivia," she whispered, yelled, casting a performative glance at Arthur's sleeping form. "We need to talk now, out in the hall." I stood up slowly, tucked the blanket around my grandfather, and followed her out. Marcus was leaning against the wall, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 3 hours. He was staring at a legal-sized envelope in his hand. "What is it now?" I asked, crossing my arms. "This," Olivia said, thrusting a phone screen in front of my face. It was a social media post, a photo of the Northwest Tier Medical Center with a caption about family crisis and prayers for Arthur Vance. But it was the comments that caught my eye. Her socialite friends were already asking which wing he was in and if they could send flowers. "The board of directors' wives are calling me Olivia," she hissed. "They heard we are in the founder's suite. They think I arranged this. They think our family is finally back on top after your father's business scandals. If they find out that I'm being billed for my stay, if they find out you're the one in charge and you're treating me like a stranger, I will be a laughingstock. The truth usually has that effect on people who live in glass houses, Mom," I said flatly. "Listen to me," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "I've made a deal. I told the local press, just a small, high-end lifestyle blog, that our family is making a major joint donation to the hospital today. A Vance family endowment. It will explain why we're in the VIP section, and it will fix Marcus's reputation in the city. All you have to do is sign the papers and pretend this was a group effort." I looked at Marcus. "And you went along with this?" Marcus shrugged, unable to meet my eyes. "It makes sense, Liv. Your money is just sitting there. If we brand it as a family foundation, it opens doors for me and keeps Mom in the inner circle. It's a win-win." I felt a cold, familiar anger rising in my chest. It wasn't the heat of a fire, it was the chill of deep-sea ice. They weren't just parasites, they were architects of deception. Even with Arthur's life hanging in the balance, they were worried about inner circles and branding. "You want me to subsidize your lies," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You want to take my decade of silent, grueling work and slap the Vance family label on it so you can keep pretending you're better than everyone else." "It's what families do, Olivia," Olivia pleaded, though it sounded more like a demand. "We protect the image. You have more than you can ever spend. What does it matter if people think I helped build it?" "It matters to me," I said, "because you didn't just not help. You actively tried to tear me down. You told me I would never amount to anything unless I married a man like Marcus's law partners. You told me my ideas were cute hobbies that would leave me in the poorhouse." I stepped closer to her, watching her flinch. "I am not signing anything. In fact, I've already contacted the hospital's PR department. They're about to release a statement clarifying that the Thorne Vance wing is being renamed. I'm dropping the Vance part. It will simply be the Thorne Endowment, in honor of my grandfather's middle name. Your name, Olivia, will be nowhere near this building." Olivia's face went from pale to a deep, bruised purple. "You wouldn't dare. You would humiliate your own mother? You humiliated yourself the moment you walked into this hospital and cared more about the billing department than your father's heart rate," I replied. Just then, a man in a sharp, charcoal gray suit approached us. It was Mr. Henderson, the hospital's chief legal counsel. He looked at me with a nod of profound respect before turning to Olivia and Marcus. "Mrs. Vance, Mr. Vance," Henderson said, his voice as dry as parchment. "I'm afraid there's an issue with your presence on this floor. Since Miss Olivia has officially withdrawn her family guest authorization and you are not listed as emergency contacts on Mr. Arthur's new private directive, I'm going to have to ask you to relocate to the general public area downstairs." "You can't be serious," Marcus shouted. "We are his next of kin." "Actually," Henderson said, pulling a tablet from his briefcase, "Mr. Arthur Vance signed a power of attorney 3 years ago, naming Olivia as his sole representative and decision-maker. He was quite specific about the rest of the family's involvement in his private affairs. He called it the accountability clause." I looked at my mother. She looked like she had been slapped. My grandfather had known. Even back then, when they were laughing at my broke lifestyle, Arthur had seen the truth. He had known that I was the only one who wouldn't trade his life for a social media post. "The security team is waiting by the elevators," Henderson added, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "If you'd like to avoid a scene, especially with that lifestyle blog you mentioned waiting outside, I suggest you exit through the service basement." The irony was delicious. Eleanor, who lived for the spotlight, was being forced into the shadows. Marcus, who lived for the law, was being defeated by a document he never saw coming. As security stepped forward, Eleanor turned to me, her voice trembling with a mixture of hatred and desperation. "You think you've won, don't you? You think you can just buy a new family? You'll be alone in that big house of yours, Olivia. No one will ever love you for you, they'll only love you for the founders list." "Maybe," I said, watching her being led away. "But at least I'll know the difference. You've spent so long pretending to be rich that you forgot how to be real, and that, Mom, is the most expensive mistake you've ever made." I turned back toward the ICU, leaving them to face the cameras and the creditors alone. But the final piece of the anatomy, the closing of the wound, was still to come. The basement exit of Northwest Tier Medical Center was cold, damp, and smelled of industrial detergent, a far cry from the lavender-scented VIP lounge. I watched from the glass balcony as Eleanor and Marcus were escorted out by 2 burly security guards. The lifestyle blogger Eleanor had invited was waiting by the main entrance, but they missed her entirely. Instead, they were caught on camera by a group of local freelance reporters who had been tipped off about a high-profile family being removed from a private facility. The headlines the next morning would be brutal. The Vance family wasn't just broke in spirit, they were now publicly humiliated. 3 days later, Arthur was moved to a private recovery suite, a place that looked more like a 5-star resort than a hospital room. He was sitting up, sipping tea and looking at the view of the bay. I sat across from him, finally feeling the weight of the last few years lifting off my shoulders. "You didn't have to do it all at once, Olivia," he said, his voice raspy but warm. "The renaming of the wing, that was a bold move." "It wasn't just a move, Grandpa," I replied, leaning back. "It was a necessity. I spent 10 years building a life that had nothing to do with their expectations. Every time I kept my mouth shut while Mom called me a failure, I was adding a brick to this wall. I just finally finished the masonry." Arthur smiled. "She called me this morning from a burner phone. Apparently, the credit card company froze her accounts after Marcus tried to use the family foundation line to secure a loan he couldn't back. They're staying in a budget motel near the airport." I didn't feel a flicker of guilt. The anatomy of accountability is often painful, but it is always fair. Eleanor had spent a lifetime spending money she didn't earn to impress people she didn't like. Now she was faced with the one thing she feared most, being ordinary. Later that afternoon, I met Marcus at a small, nondescript coffee shop, not the kind he liked. He looked disheveled. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and the arrogance in his eyes had been replaced by a hollow, flickering fear. "I need you to sign this, Liv," he said, pushing a legal document across the table. "It's a non-disclosure agreement. If you sign it, we won't tell the press about your involvement in our financial situation. In exchange, we just need a small settlement. $1 million, maybe 2, it's pocket change for you." I didn't even pick up the paper. I just stared at him until he started to fidget with his cufflinks. "Marcus, you're a lawyer. Or at least you were," I said quietly. "You should know that you don't have any leverage." I've already filed a preemptive suit for harassment and financial fraud against you for trying to use my name at the pharmacy and the bank. If you even think about talking to the press, I'll release the full transcripts of the hospital security footage, including the part where Mom was screaming about the cost of the coffee while Grandpa was in surgery. Marcus's hand began to shake. You destroy us, your own family? You destroyed the family a long time ago, I said. You just didn't realize it because you were too busy counting the silver. I'm not giving you a dime. Not because I'm greedy, but because I'm a scientist of human nature. If I give you money now, you'll never learn how to survive. Consider this my final lesson in minimalism. I stood up, leaving a $5 bill on the table for my coffee and exactly nothing for his. As I walked back to my car, the same old sedan Alina hated, I felt a strange sense of peace. I could have bought a fleet of Italian sports cars. I could have lived in a mansion on the hill, but I liked my life. I liked the quiet. I liked knowing that I was the master of my own fate, built on the solid ground of my own hard work rather than the shifting sands of a family name. I drove back to the hospital to check on Arthur one last time before he was discharged. As I passed the main lobby, I saw the Thorn Vance sign being taken down. A worker was carefully unscrewing the letters of our family name. Going to be the Thorn Medical Wing by sunset, ma'am, he said, tipping his cap to me. Good, I said, it's a stronger name. That evening, I received a final text from Alina. It was a long, rambling message filled with insults, pleas for money, and accusations of betrayal. I didn't read it all. I didn't need to. I simply blocked the number. The anatomy of a revenge story isn't about the person who gets hurt. It's about the person who heals. It's about the girl who was told she was broke and useless, finally standing in the light of her own success, realizing that the people who tried to dim her sparkle were never the ones who deserved to see her shine. I looked out at the Seattle skyline, the rain blurring the lights into a beautiful, chaotic mosaic. I was Olivia Thorne now, at least in spirit. The Vance name died in that hospital lobby, buried under the weight of its own ego. And as for me, I was just getting started. Justice isn't always served in a courtroom. Sometimes it's served in a hospital hallway by a daughter who knew that the best way to get even was to simply be better. The scream of money had finally been replaced by the quiet, steady hum of a life well lived. And for the first time in 32 years, I could hear myself think.